Okay, so we are diving deep into rebooting AI today.
Yeah.
Your copy, in fact.
Mm.
So clearly you're interested in AI, and these days, who isn't? It's everywhere you look, right? But this book, it seems to be saying, hold on a second. You know, AI might not be the world-changing force that we're being sold.
That's right. Rebooting AI really kind of threw some cold water on all that AI hype. We always hear about how close we are to creating these truly intelligent machines, but this book, it really challenges that idea.
Which is interesting because you're right. AI has always been about these big promises, flying cars, robot butlers, the whole nine yards. And it really does feel like we're on the edge of something huge happening. So what's the disconnect? Why is this book, why is it pushing back against all the AI excitement?
Well, the authors, they argue, their argument is that the main approach to AI right now, it's called deep learning. It has some pretty serious limitations.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Deep learning.
Hmm.
For those of us who haven't quite figured out what that means yet, isn't that what's behind like all the cool AI stuff? I mean, you got things like facial recognition and medical diagnoses, stuff that seemed impossible just a few years ago.
Absolutely. You're right. The authors, I think they do a good job of acknowledging the successes that deep learning has had. It's incredibly good at those narrow tasks you're talking about, like image recognition. That's definitely a strong suit for deep learning. But here's the thing, it struggles with stuff that we humans just do naturally, things that require like real understanding, common sense reasoning, understanding language with all its nuances, being able to adapt when things change unexpectedly, that kind of stuff.
So it's like having a computer that can ace a vocabulary test, but can't
Yes.
actually have a conversation.
Exactly.
Or like
Yeah.
it can win on Jeopardy, but it won't get why a joke about a chicken crossing the road is funny.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And the book really draws a line between what we have now, what they call narrow AI, which, as we said, is great for very specific tasks. And then there's deep understanding, which is what they say is the real game changer, the kind of AI that can actually get closer to how humans think.
Okay, now I see why we're talking about this.
Yeah.
Why does that distinction matter so much? What's the problem if AI can't, like, understand a good dad joke?
Well, because think about it. As we start relying more and more on AI in our lives every single day, this gap, this lack of deep understanding, it can lead to, well, frankly, some pretty big problems.
And the authors, they definitely don't shy away from giving some examples, do they?
Not at all. They actually jump right into a bunch of cautionary tales. One that comes to mind is Microsoft's chatbot, Tay. You remember that? It was designed to learn from interacting with people online. Seemed harmless enough.
Right, what could go wrong?
Yeah, well, except within hours, it was being flooded with all this awful stuff, like really toxic and hateful language.
Hmm.
And because it was designed to learn from what it was exposed to, it started repeating all that back.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was a huge mess for them, to say the least. It's true, though, isn't it? The old garbage in, garbage out problem. But with AI, the consequences are way bigger than a few bad tweets.
Right. And the book goes even further, highlighting how this lack of deep understanding has caused real problems. Things like driverless cars, misinterpreting situations, facial recognition systems that are biased, even medical AI making mistakes because they just don't have that, human touch, that ability to understand the subtleties of the world.
It really does make you think twice, doesn't it? Every time you see a headline screaming about AI taking over the world or
But
whatever.
it really does make you wonder. And that's really what the authors are getting at. It's not that AI isn't capable of some incredible things, because it is. But we have to be honest about its limits. What can it actually do well right now? Where does it fall short? And the big one, how do we get from this narrow AI to that deep understanding that everyone's talking about?
Big questions, for sure. But this book, it's not just pointing out problems, is it? It seems like the authors actually offer some kind of solution with this deep understanding idea. So what does that actually look like? How do we go from where we are now to something better?
So their suggestion is actually a pretty radical change in how we approach AI. It's not just about feeding machines more data, it's about teaching them to understand the world more like we do, using reason and logic.
Okay, now that is both really cool and kind of scary.
Oh.
If we're talking about teaching machines to actually think like humans, are we basically talking about, well, creating another us?
That's a common fear, for sure. But the book makes it clear that real AI isn't about copying human consciousness. It's about giving machines the tools to understand and reason in a way that helps us, that benefits humanity.
So less about robots taking over, more about robots, I don't know, helping us make the world a better place.
Exactly. But to get there, to reach that deeper understanding, AI needs to go beyond just seeing patterns in data. It needs to really grasp
Definitely.
things like common sense, and the ability to abstract and generalize. Like we were saying, AI that understands causality, not just correlation, being able to keep track of objects and how they relate to each other, even as time passes. Those are all key ingredients here.
I don't know about you, but some of those sound, well, pretty complicated. Common sense, for example.
Mhm.
It seems so basic, right? We just kind of do it.
Yeah.
But how do you even begin to explain that to a machine? It's not like you can just download a common sense app.
You're hitting on something really important there. It turns out common sense is a lot trickier than we tend to think. It's not about knowing a bunch of facts. It's about understanding how those facts connect to each other, how they play out in the real world.
It's all about context, right?
Exactly. And the authors, they have this great example about a restaurant. You could feed an AI all the data in the world about restaurants. Things like restaurants serve food, people eat at restaurants. But that by itself, that wouldn't give the AI a real understanding of what a restaurant is. All the social rules, the different jobs people have, what happens when you go to a restaurant, from ordering to paying the bill. Humans, we just kind of pick up on all of that through experience, by watching, even hearing stories. But
Hmm.
for a machine, that's a whole different ballgame.
It's true. We learn so much without even really trying to. But for a machine to understand things like that, it's got to be incredibly hard. So how do we even get started? How do you teach a machine something as, well, as human as common sense?
It's a huge question, and one that researchers are grappling with right now. The book suggests a few places to start. One is to develop AI systems that can represent the basic building blocks of how we understand the world, things like time, space, cause, and effect. Almost like you're giving them a framework, a foundation that they can then use to make sense of what they encounter, how things happen, how people and objects interact.
So it's like you're laying the groundwork, building the base before you can start constructing the whole house. Those core concepts have to be there first.
Exactly. Another key element is flexibility. AI systems today, they're still pretty rigid. They tend to break down when they encounter something that wasn't in their training data. But us humans, we're
Mhm.
adaptable. We can use what we know or past experiences, even our gut feelings, to figure out new situations we haven't seen before.
It's like being able to improvise,
Yeah.
when things go off script, you got to be able to adjust. If AI is ever going to be truly helpful, it needs that same ability to roll with the punches, because the real world,
Mm.
it's full of surprises.
Couldn't agree more. And that actually brings us to another limitation that the book talks about, this heavy reliance on big data. The authors, they make the case that just giving machines more and more data, it's not going to magically give them deep understanding.
It's like, I don't know, thinking you can learn a new language just by memorizing the dictionary. You might recognize some words, but you're not going to get the grammar, the context, the stuff that lets you actually have a conversation.
That's a really good analogy. Language is another area where the book points out the weaknesses of where AI is at right now.
Mm.
Think about Google Talk to Books, for example. When that came out, it seemed pretty amazing, right? Ask it anything, and it would search through this massive library to find relevant parts.
I remember that.
Yeah.
It felt like having all the world's information right there at your fingertips.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and the authors make this argument pretty clearly. As impressive as Talk to Books was, it was still basically a really good keyword matching system.
Yeah.
It couldn't actually grasp the meaning of what it was reading. It couldn't make connections that weren't obvious or answer questions that required, real comprehension.
So it's not enough to just be able to access information. You have to be able to actually
Yeah.
understand it, process it, figure out what it all means. It's like the difference between seeing the words of a joke
Yeah.
and actually getting the joke.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Speaking of jokes, that reminds me of something else from the book, this whole idea of AI and humor. It feels so uniquely human. Like only people can really be funny.
Absolutely. And it gets right to the heart of why deep understanding is so important. Humor, it relies on all these things: irony, satire, shared experiences, cultural references. It's no wonder AI struggles with it, right? Without a much deeper understanding of all those things, it just can't quite grasp what makes something funny.
It's like they say, you had to be there. So if throwing more data at the problem isn't the answer, what is? How do we help AI take that leap from recognizing patterns to actually understanding what those patterns mean?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And the book does offer up some possibilities. One that they spend some time on is the development of what they call cognitive models. Building those into AI systems could be a really important step.
Cognitive models, huh? Now we're getting really complex. What are we talking about here?
Okay, so imagine you have a mental model of, say, a city in your head. You don't just have a list of streets and buildings, right? You understand how they all fit together, how the traffic flows, the best way to get from point A to point B. It's a framework that lets you make sense of that environment, navigate it effectively. Cognitive models in AI, they're trying to do something similar. They're about providing a framework for AI to understand how the world works, how people behave, how different events are connected.
So instead of just recognizing a restaurant, the AI would have this whole mental map of what a restaurant represents, how it fits into the bigger picture. And that's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Mhm.
But how on earth do you even begin to build something like that into a machine?
Oh, there's no doubt it's a massive undertaking. But the book suggests that these cognitive models, they're crucial if we want AI to go beyond just doing very specific tasks, if we want it to have a deeper, more flexible understanding of the world.
So it's not even really about making AI smarter. It's about making it wiser, more like us, I guess, with that intuition, that ability to deal with a world that doesn't always make sense.
Exactly. And as AI gets more and more powerful, as we incorporate it more and more into our lives, we also have to be really careful about the ethical implications. How do we make sure these systems are used responsibly? How do we prevent bias, especially when so much of the data we use to train AI is, well, it's already biased because we humans are biased, right?
So it's about more than just like making AI super smart. It's about making sure it's actually on our side, that it's working with us, not just, crunching numbers in ways we don't understand.
Exactly. Imagine AI that can actually get what medical research is all about and help doctors come up with treatments for each patient. Imagine AI that can help kids learn in a way that makes sense for them, personalized education. Think about transportation systems that are designed for safety first and also efficiency. And hey, maybe even new kinds of art and entertainment that we can't even imagine right now, all thanks to AI.
Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for a future with super helpful AI as long as the robots don't decide to take over. But how realistic is all of this? Are we talking about something that might happen decades from now, centuries even, or is it closer than we think?
That is the million-dollar question. And to be fair, the book doesn't pretend to have all the answers. But it does lay out, kind of a path forward, the hurdles we have to clear if we want to get to that deep understanding that we've been talking about.
Like what? What are some of the biggest challenges to getting AI to that point?
Well, one of the big ones is figuring out how to represent common sense in a way that computers can actually use. Because it's not enough for them to just know facts. They have to understand how all those facts connect, what they mean together, the context.
So it's not enough to know that water boils at 212 degrees.
Mm.
The AI also needs to know that sticking your hand in boiling water is a bad idea, no matter how curious you are.
Exactly. We need AI that can think ahead, that can see the consequences of actions, that can use what it knows to make good decisions. And that kind of leads us to another big challenge. We have to figure out how to make AI systems that can learn from what they already know. Right now, they kind of have to start from scratch every time we give them a new problem. But we humans, we learn and adapt by using what we've already experienced, right? It's like we build up this understanding over time that we can apply to new situations. AI needs to be able to do that too.
So it's not just about AI learning faster, it's about it learning smarter in a way that's more human, like you were saying before, with that intuition, that ability to handle the unexpected.
Exactly. And as AI becomes more powerful, more integrated into our lives, we also can't ignore the ethical side of things. How do we make sure these systems are being used for good? How do we prevent bias? Especially since, let's be honest, a lot of the data we use to train AI is already biased because it comes from us, from humans.
So we need to think about AI ethics right from the start, not as an afterthought, right? Like we have to build these things with safeguards in place from the ground up.
I think that's exactly right. The book really stresses that ethics can't be something we deal with later. It has to be a part of the entire process of developing AI, from the data that's used to the goals we set for these systems.
It's not enough to just build cool technology. It has to
Right.
be technology that reflects, who we are, what we believe in, and it has to be something that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Right.
No pressure, right? AI developers.
Right. It's a tall order, no question. But this isn't just a job for computer scientists. As the book makes clear, we need people from all kinds of backgrounds to be involved. Philosophers, ethicists, social scientists, artists, writers, people who can bring different perspectives to the table and help make sure that AI develops in a way that's good for humanity.
It sounds like it really takes a village, right? A global conversation about the kind of future we want and how AI fits into that. We might not have those robot butlers making our coffee just yet. But this deep dive into rebooting AI, if it's taught us anything, it's that things are moving fast. The quest to understand intelligence, and I mean both artificial and human intelligence, it's more relevant now than ever. And that's something we should all be paying attention to, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. What the future of AI looks like really comes down to us, to the choices we make, the values we prioritize, and our willingness to ask the tough questions and guide this technology in the right direction.
Well said. You've definitely given our listeners a lot to consider today. One last thing before we go. If AI's biggest hurdle really is this lack of common sense, maybe we should all take a moment to ask ourselves, are we humans as sensible as we think we are? That's something to think about, isn't it?